Hey everyone! Today's conversation is about meeting in person. It's about actually connecting with people one on one. You're going to conferences. You're going to. I'm speaking at a medical affairs conference in a couple of weeks, and everyone's still talking about how they're excited about finally connecting and meeting people. So imagine that, but meeting in an office. Are you ready for that? So if you are in medical affairs, if you're in the life sciences, you probably care about today's discussion. Our guests today, we've had them before. It's basically Gary and Dan. Dan Ritterman and Gary Lozoff from Tactics Real Estate Advisors. They exclusively represent end users of commercial real estate. Their clients are lab, office, and industrial users looking to occupy space in Philadelphia and the surrounding suburbs. You can reach Dan at dritterman@tactics.com. I'm going to put that up on the screen for those people who are watching. And you can see Gary as G Lozoff, Lozoff, at tactics.com. And that's going to be on the website as well. And just to be clear, that's the website, tactics.com. That's D Ritterman, and that is Gary. So first of all, our guests for today, Dan Ritterman and Gary Lozoff. This is Darshan Talks live stream. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. I'm an attorney. I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. But this is not legal advice. This is not clinical advice. These are just conversations we're having with experts like Dan and Gary. So it should be super fun. If you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe, please share. Please reach out to Dan and Gary if you have questions, because I know they'd appreciate it. You can always find me on Twitter, Darshan Talks. Go to our website, DarshanTalks.com. And now getting back to the usual. Dan, Gary, how are you?
Feeling blessed to be here with you, Darshan. We're round two.
Yeah, we're living the dream in our office, which feels really nice to be.
Well, I think you have a really beautiful background, don't you? And I think it's one of those really pretty setups. I mean, they show this in Philly, and it's always part of a multi-million-dollar empire. So there you go.
And it's legit in our case, Darshan. This is our deck.
Can you move a little bit? I'm curious about the deck.
Sure.
Oh, okay. So you literally back into it. That looks beautiful.
We're on the fifth. Yeah, we're on the fifth floor at 2 Logan Square. So we have a beautiful view of the Comcast buildings, of the whole Center City skyline. We love it down here.
Southeast corner.
Lucky people. So tell me this. Everyone's talking about Philadelphia for the life sciences. It's become a hub. The question is, from your perspective, what does Philadelphia offer that, say, a Boston doesn't have? Because, everyone's going to Boston. Everyone's going to the West Coast. Why Philly?
So Philadelphia is an interestingly positioned real estate market in that we have some of the best sort of things that life science companies are looking for, which is an employee base of highly qualified individuals due to all the universities in the area. A sort of history of having life sciences companies in this market. Some of the largest pharma companies have been located here for a very long time. So the talent pool is here. But what we also have here in Philadelphia is real estate that by national standards is considered reasonably priced and affordable, right? And that's something that we really haven't seen in a lot of these other markets, especially like Boston, like you mentioned, where that has been a life sciences hub for a very long time and is priced accordingly. And the inventory really there is very tight up in Boston. So a lot of companies who previously may have looked to Boston as the market they want to be are looking for these other sort of somewhat local markets to Boston, and Philadelphia being sort of right on that same corridor up here in the Northeast is sort of a natural place for a lot of these companies to start looking.
So you say that, but then why is Philadelphia reasonably priced? Why hasn't it gone up like Research Triangle Park or like Boston or like San Fran or San Diego?
It's a great question, Darshan. And the answer is complex, and some of that is beyond our collective pay grade.
Sure.
The economy in Philadelphia generally is slow moving, and it has grown, but it has grown at a pace that's retarded compared to other large markets in the continental U.S. and other business centers offshore. Because the economy has been slow growing, right? Real estate, which supports that growth, that economy, also has been a slow-moving beast. And by slow-moving, it's not just about occupancy and absorption, it's also about underlying lease economics, right?
Right.
If the underlying economy were stronger, that economy would support stronger rents, right? And therefore a more favorable set of conditions for real estate entrepreneurs to take the risk to, put more product into the ground, to create more inventory for folks like Dan and me to fill for our clients.
Which really raises that question, right? Why is the economy slow growing? Is it because it's obviously not a nationwide thing? It's
Right.
localized to Philly. And I say this as someone who's lived in Philly for 20 years. I love Philly. But one of the big things we always talk about is people compare Philly to Detroit. People compare Philly to, when people think Philly, they think the harder parts of Philly.
Yeah.
And there's so much more than that. So the question to you is, what can we, as a people of Philly, do to make it less slow growing, or to put it in a different way, without using double negatives, to make it faster growing?
Well, I think what we need to be doing is doing everything within our civic and private economy power to support entrepreneurialism, whether it's within the university ecosystems or larger entrepreneurial activities in enterprise businesses, or folks who are just beginning in their garages, right, or their dens. And that entrepreneurial support system, right, is taking hold. And it's taking hold very, very specifically around cell and gene therapy, biotechnology, biomanufacturing, medical devices, and that part of our economy in this region is really growing, Darshan, and it's growing independently from the sort of legacy big pharma in this region, and that's exciting. We're looking at a workforce in just these therapeutic components of the economy that's approaching 10,000 persons in this region. That's energy, and that drives real estate decision making. It drives both on the office and lab side, and as well as residential. It also drives other components of our economy in a very, very favorable way.
So what I hear you saying, Gary, is yes, the economy is slower moving, but in certain pockets. There are pockets that are faster moving.
Right.
Pockets like life sciences.
Right.
My question for you then is, have you seen a lot of efforts being made? Because there is such a lag between, I mean, you and I were just talking right before the conversation went live, and you were talking about how there's this intense need for space right now, and that space isn't going to be ready for another 6 months, so or even the end of the year. So the question is, have you seen more of those public-private partnerships or academic commercial partnerships that are helping fill that space? And what has that struggle been like? And are you helping negotiate those conversations?
Well, it's really interesting, Darshan. Just in my little corner of our practice realm, one of the more substantial projects that we've executed here at Tactics over the last couple of years has been the new headquarters and lab and biomanufacturing platform space for a company called Biome. Biome is an 8-year-old business. It was started in New Mexico. The founders moved here to participate in a local accelerator program. Sounds good, right? And the business has really grown. And they just recently finished a move to a 50,000-foot new space at 401 North Broad. A critical component in the capital structure to make that deal happen was the support of our state and local government. Biome was awarded a $3 million RACP grant to support the capital expenditure that was needed to convert this former data center space to a biomanufacturing and fulfillment platform.
Huh.
Interesting sort of, data point on the connection between, governmental urging, governmental economic support, and workforce growth here in Philadelphia. Biome moved out of when we started to work with Biome in the spring of 2020. That workforce was about 40 persons desking in Philadelphia. The space that they moved into has capacity for 140 desking options. And Darshan, they're practically full now.
Wow.
So I think that, do I think that, there are more stories to be told? Sure. And there are other tax subsidy programs that are available here. But I think what we ought to be focusing on are the success stories, right, and in nurturing success.
Right.
I mean, as Philadelphians, we're really, there's sort of this civic DNA around something else other than success. Right. And I think we've got a lot to tout here. And Biome is just one of those stories. Obviously, the cell and gene therapy story that's developing literally out of the labs at CHOP and University of Pennsylvania is of staggering importance to not only our economy here, but to human health, right? And that story is being written across the river in University City right now. And 10 years ago, that was, those were Petri dishes in a lab. And now it's something else.
So do you see this new bellwether district? You talked about across the river, which really raises that question of, I think it's called the bellwether district, the one where they're trying to reclassify the, So could you talk a little bit about, does that afford new opportunities, or is there a glut in space that needs to be better optimized before we go down looking at other places? Like, where do you see this taking us next?
I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
Look, the risk-adjusted price was correct, right? They attracted, the opportunity attracted some very, very significant new capital and new vision. The size of that and scale of that project is staggering. Yeah. And it's an opportunity to literally create a whole new community node in Greater Center City, and that the vision for which is still being defined, and it's going to take years for them to clean up the site and get downfield on their lease up. My gosh, though, I mean, what a platform, for life sciences, for industrial, for office, for residential.
It's the next naval yard, isn't it?
Yeah.
It was an empty space, and then they repurposed it, and now you have the naval yard in Philadelphia.
Yeah,
which is
and instead of it servicing the U.S. Navy, this was a refinery and petroleum products and site, and it went through some tough times. But the Navy Yard is a great example of of patience, of vision, and of staying with a plan. And that the Navy Yard is what's happening down there is tremendous, and it certainly gives the folks who are behind the bellwether district hope. We're seeing this elsewhere. Dan and I were just on a tour last week down in northern Delaware of a site that had been dormant for years as part of the DuPont portfolio. And one of the really interesting entrepreneurial healthcare and life sciences development teams just acquired that site. It is known in the market now as Chestnut Run. And there's another story that's going to be written with companies that are not only native to northern Delaware, but we think that there's going to be a lot of movement from companies that are now situated in the western suburbs of Philadelphia down to that location north of Wilmington because of some really, really sexy attributes of that project.
I find it so interesting because on one hand, I know that as someone who lived in Center City, I struggled with Center City taxes, and that's obviously one of the downsides. But what I'm hearing you say is there's enough of a weight it's the gravitational pull of the people in Center City, in Philadelphia, is pulling people in. For example, with the Biome company and what you guys have seen with that. But it's going to reflect in the Bellwether district, in Chester Run. So I think it raises new opportunities. To that end, and since Gary, we've asked you a lot of questions, I'll ask Dan this just so we have him answer. But Dan, do you see how when people are coming to you and going, you know what we want? We want to be in the Philadelphia area because the gravitational pull is just too much, but we want to optimize this. What is your best strategy? Is it going to the government and saying, look, we need either some kind of tax abatement or we need some kind of grant? Or is it, let's talk about Chestnut Run, or Bellwether, or how do you make that decision? How do you guide someone who's interested in the life sciences?
A lot of this has to do with where your employee base is located. And I think that for a lot of our clients, and this is whether you're a life sciences group or in a different industry, we need to understand what the incentive structure is of your employees are. And some of this really matters about what stage the company is in. Because you have some companies that are coming from Boston who are looking for real estate who say, we're really seeking cheaper, more efficient real estate, or somewhere we can put our footprint down. And for those companies, you're not as concerned with where the employee base is because maybe the employee base is built around the location after the fact, right? But for a lot of these companies, especially in this environment where hiring is at such a premium and retaining employees is at such a premium, and you hear about this in the news every day with how the reshuffling of employees from one company to another, if you are already established in a single market, you're going to be less willing to sort of rock the boat of where your company is located, because whatever savings you may get on the real estate end, you may lose in the hiring and the retraining of your employees. So I think so much of this is really individual and specific to the company about where you'd like to be located, and also who do you want to be located with and nearby. And a lot of this has to do with what other companies are sort of complementary to what you're doing, whether it's on the partnerships or just creating an environment. And one of the things that we were excited about at CRISP when we toured is just the community that they're trying to build within this campus, right? You have this sort of beautiful setting where they're going to build a whole nice amenity base, and they're going to put the buildings kind of ring around the amenity base. And that's a very different feeling from being in University City, right? So it's the sort of, or the Navy Yard, or one of these in the Bellwether district. It's really a different feel. So some of it has to do with employee hiring and retention. Some of it has to do with the synergies that you can find among the other tenants who are within a given park, which also is why we could touch on this a little bit about landlords have become picky about what companies they want to have within their ecosystem, because they want to make sure that they're building something that complements what they're trying to do. And especially as companies grow and get larger, landlords, at least right now, given the lack of inventory on the market, can sort of be a little choosier about who do I want to build the environment that I'm trying to build. So you really have to sort of step into the shoes of the company that we're representing in our case to figure out what best supports their business case. And it's not the same for every company. For some, it's price, some it's location, some it's these synergies. It really just depends on what their goals are.
And you know what, Dan? It's interesting too, Darshan, but that story can change over time, right? Often we're going into these engagements and we're taking inventory of all these high-level considerations. And as the company completes its design programming, determines more precisely what its space need is, takes surveys of their employees to sort of pressure test their sentiments around all that, what the presumptions are going in often change. And sometimes they don't. Going back, for example, to Biome, there was a decision by the founders and C team that despite the economic advantages, for example, of locating outside the city, you referred to high taxes here, and that is an issue. It's a very big barrier to growth here. The folks who are running this process for Biome said, no, we're staying here. We want We want
So why did they say that?
We want to maintain this as a great destination for our workforce. And,
But why not consider Chestnut Run or King of Prussia or Devon or something like that?
Others might, but for the Biome team,
Yeah,
they said no. We are committed to staying in the city, and because of all kinds of transit factors,
got it.
affecting their workforce and their management, they determined to stay in Greater Center City.
So I think that's a really interesting factor, because I think the future is in recognizing where the workforce is coming from. And what I mean by that is something you referenced a few minutes ago, which was, and it's something I've experienced as well in my different roles. When I now deal with life sciences companies and I deal more with healthcare companies, the big thing you're seeing is all the employers are going, I don't care where you live. I don't need you to come into the office. What I need is you work wherever you are and then show up when I need you to show up. And if that's true, what you need is that hub. You need that central location everyone can fly to. And yes, King of Prussia is great. Devon's great. Chestnut Run's great. But there's something to be said for door-to-door from the airport to Center City, Philadelphia in 20 minutes flat.
By the way, Darshan, that's one of the brilliant attributes of the Navy Yard and Bellwether District. I mean, think of the proximity to PHL.
Right.
Well, and conversely, that's been one of the issues with the King of Prussia market for a very long time. And there's been a very long, prolonged battle about trying to get a rail line to service the King of Prussia market, because it really is not accessible from Center City, Philadelphia, unless you have a car.
Right. But I mean, that luckily Uber's handled some of those issues, but it's still, you still struggle with this idea of, yeah, Uber's great, but sometimes I just want to sit in the train and not worry and just not stress, and I don't have to deal with whatever. Like, it's just easier to get on a train. And I've faced that coming in from an international flight. I've faced that coming in from a local flight. So how are virtual employees affecting the type of real estate people are looking? Are people looking at more at larger manufacturing spaces and larger what's the word I'm looking for? Lab spaces, but smaller office spaces, or what? How has the mix changed, if at all?
Well, again, I think it's specific to
of course,
the C teams and the facilities directors for these businesses. But look, I think one of the profound changes in what it is that Dan and I are doing on the office side is these leaders' adaptation to exactly the stressors that you just talked about bringing people, having a reason to go to the office and stay there and feel comfortable and safe and nurtured while one is in the office. And some of that is, bringing in some of the more retailish aspects that have perhaps been less prominent in office design, but I think are going to, we know that they're taking firmer grip on these.
What do you mean by retailish aspect? I mean, that sounds interesting.
Well, spaces where workforces feel very comfortable gathering and communing with each other. In other words, less individual private space, more emphasis on space, from which, for example, Dan and I are meeting you today.
Right.
I think it's the convergence of the life sciences industry with sort of what the technology and tech startup world has been doing for a decade now, where the idea that we're going to do heads down work in our own private individual space within our office is not a thing of the past, but it's less of a focus on how we build these spaces out now. Whereas what we want to do is, we want to really encourage teamwork and all sitting together in these sort of like huddle areas so that we can all get together when we are in the office and do the work that we probably couldn't do when we were at home, heads down. That work can be done from home and will continue to be done from home. So it's sort of that convergence of what technology companies have been doing for a long time, and the life sciences companies are now implementing that into their programs.
I guess, Darshan, another way of thinking about it is, the office as an antidote to remote work fatigue, the office as a destination. And what we are striving to do in this process is improve, optimize those destinational attributes into these projects, because many workers have a choice right now. And for companies whose culture, right, whose core culture is about face-to-face work and collaboration, that bar has been raised on that destinational stuff.
And I think that's the point, right? I think that's where tactics sort of distinguishes itself from so many other companies, in that people can come to you and go, this is my problem. My workers are all working in all these different places all over the world, all over the country, all over the state, all over the city. And I need a reason for them to come together. And since you work with the people looking for real estate, you are in the unique position of saying, oh, I know that these three companies did this solution, and that's worked out well for them. So my question for you is, what are some top three things that people have done that has become that destination, that shopper's what you call it, the retail paradise, or whatever you want to call that, that brings people into that door that you have identified, because no one else is seeing that. People are seeing it from the perspective of the landlords, and they're forgetting what else has to be out there. So
I think we've seen across the board what we are calling a flight to quality.
Flight to quality, I like that.
And I think that it's really because I didn't coin that, but I'll take credit for it on this conversation. But I think that we've seen in the past.
Repeat the mantra.
Right. When your space is getting smaller and more efficient, because not everyone's in the office every day, I think a lot of companies are taking that opportunity to say, okay, yes, we have this savings on our footprint because the footprint's getting smaller. Maybe a better use of those dollars is to make the space that we do have higher quality. Maybe it's a higher quality building, or it's amenity that we never would have built before, whether it's a break room or some kind of like higher quality huddle areas. Make the technology all work seamlessly, whereas before we may have dealt with some bumps in the road because that was the way that we were doing things. Is you can reinvest some of those dollars that you're saving on your footprint into making the space a place that people want to go on the days that they do need to be in the office, instead of a place where they're dreading being and they'll leave as soon as they can.
So what you said without saying it, but you kind of hinted at it. So number one is higher quality, higher furnishings, if you will. And the second one is better telecommuting spaces. So you might have to be meeting with your team from London, and you still need to have your meeting before you do that. So you'll bring people in, you'll have that efficient meeting, and then seamlessly connect with London. And that's becoming a higher priority. And
it may be, Darshan, that the London meeting involves more people from Philadelphia. So the space has to be adapted to accommodate more people. The technology has to be superior to be able to facilitate and conduct a meeting that feels organic. Right. And in person, even though it isn't. It's transcontinental, right? Or it's intercontinental. Separated by 4,000 miles of ocean. I think all of that. I think, to sort of riff or to reference back to Biome, we spent quite a bit of time in that project obtaining assurances and commitments from building ownership to support the bicycle commuting component of the workforce.
Right.
And that sounds like a shooting from the painted area, but in the case of adapting a 1.3 million square foot data center building to the needs of a 21st century biotech workforce, many of whom commute by bicycle, was an interesting set of conversations. One interesting amenity that they decided to install and they're using is a brew pub. They have a component of their workforce that enjoys brewing malt beverages at home. So they decided to bring that into their space and use that as part of their their amenity
That is so cool.
offering. Another thing that was that I thought was fascinating in that transaction was the extent to which the ownership of the building was willing to accommodate to Biome's interest in having operable windows. The space is in a building that is decades old and we needed new windows as part of this 50,000 foot build out.
Yeah.
And a requirement developed internally within Biome and went all the way up to say, yeah, we want to maximize the use of operable windows. We want fresh air in our space, not only cycled in through the exhaust from the roof, but that we can feel while we're at our desks.
Which may seem like a small thing to sort of someone who's not, but very few buildings offer that kind of amenity.
Correct.
Which is so interesting to me. Like it's just changes. I've worked in one of the older buildings in Philly, on the higher floors, and I can tell you it was really nice being able to open up my window because I knew that the person next to me couldn't. And it's in a time of COVID where you're saying, I want fresh circulating air.
Yeah.
It's a super important thing to have. So, I mean, we could keep talking about this forever, and we're well past time. But we definitely need to have you back on again, continue this conversation. This was super, super fun. I hope you'll consider coming back. But before we do that, I need you to tell people how they can reach you.
Yeah, I think you can find us on our website, which is tactix.com, tactix.com. My email address is dritterman at tactix.com, right up there on the screen. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so I think that's a great place to connect with both me and Gary. We post a lot about the things that we're doing, things that we find interesting going on in the market, and I think people will get some value out of that.
That sounds awesome. And Gary, how do they reach you?
Lozoff, Glozoff at tactix.com.
Awesome. Here's a question for you. What would you like to ask the audience?
I would love to ask the audience, what's keeping you up at night about your real estate, your company's real estate platform? The legacy mantra has always been, every operating business has a real estate platform. And now things are a little bit different because so many companies, as you talked about earlier, Darshan, have adapted and integrated remote hiring and work into their company's culture. Nonetheless, there are lots of stressors around this, perhaps even more so now, because so few people are in offices.
Yeah.
We want to help these C teams and facilities decision makers to create the kind of impact that they're envisioning at the lowest feasible cost.
So I'll tell you what's keeping me up at night from my perspective as a company that services the life sciences. And it's one of those things that I really wish existed as a solution that simply isn't out there enough, which is I really wish there was a place that would allow for a virtual mailbox, pick up my phone calls. I don't need to come into the office as often, but eventually be able to grow into more. I've seen virtual office spaces, but create that incubation system that allows for that initial structure to grow into more, to look like I'm a much bigger group, but enable me to do that when the time is right.
And do you feel like those solutions are not out there for you right now?
No, I don't. I know they aren't because I've looked at far too many of them. I mean, there's some great places like Regis and like that do stuff, but they kind of expect you to buy into more than just the virtual system.
Right. And ironically, there's a real estate component to it, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. But my point is, I would love to have a virtual system that like this data center theoretically could have that picks up my phone calls, picks up for 50 companies, and then theoretically, and they still have the real estate component being taken off by Biome. Right. But I get to stay in the same location as them. And then I grow into it with other people, with other life sciences companies. But that simply doesn't exist. And it's a tragedy for me personally. But
it's really Great point.
I'll ask a pointed real estate question to the audience, if that's okay. We're in a time of unprecedented life sciences real estate development, right? We've talked about a number of these locations where there is going to be a significant amount of real estate to fill. And the way that these developers fill that real estate is by hiring generally large brokerages to help them bring tenants into their space. And what I would like to ask the audience is, if you are not working with a real estate brokerage like Tactics, who exclusively represents end users and has no landlord loyalties, what are you doing to make yourself comfortable that you are being given an unbiased lay of the entire real estate landscape? And I think that it's important that people make sure that they're educated to understand what their options are and that they're really seeing the entire field.
And to underscore that point, they also need to be educated on the impact, the consequences of conflicts of interest that that permeate and are really corroding our industry.
We're all attorneys, so we can talk conflict of interest, right?
No, but that's what I think you're getting at.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's a valuable question, but I'll tell you, as someone who's not looking in the market, I think this is sort of what hits you, right? It's someone who's not looking in the market. All I see out there is, oh, there's so much space, and malls are crumbling because no one's going to the malls, and no one's going to all these places. So there's so much open space until you start looking for what you actually want and realize that's not there. So I think the big, and at that point you go, it's too late for me to negotiate. I just need to be somewhere because I've fully outgrown this space, and the time I could have spent looking is the time I wasted because I didn't think there was a problem. I thought the landlords would be clamoring for me, and what I've realized is it's the opposite, and it's too late for me to do something. I guess I got to choose whatever I got to choose and move on. So I think that is the big disconnect in the market right now.
You're raising a really, really important point. Our process is a slow-moving process. Let's go back to Biome for a moment. Between the time that we were engaged to initially work with them and move in, 19 months, right? So, and particularly when one is a tenant, right, in a multi-tenant building, time is not one's friend. Right. So one of the things that we are concerned that we get right with our clients at the outset is a timeline. To be able to execute a deal on terms that are most favorable, that take advantage, that optimize the leverage that the tenant otherwise has. And we do that by starting early.
But what is early? What is the definition of early?
Well,
too early.
Yeah, it's great question. Too early is a moment in time at which your existing landlord won't take you seriously. Okay, if you come back to them and say we'd like to look at extending and expanding, or perhaps contracting, and we're going to do so elsewhere as well. We're going to look at those relocation options. If one is too early, meaning several years out, longer obviously than the 19 months that we just talked about. Yeah, that's a risk. Too late, on the other end of the continuum, is the moment in time at which you cannot make a move. You cannot relocate and build out and occupy in time to correspond to the end of your existing lease.
It's an interesting point, and I don't know if we have the time to talk about it, but I'll quickly raise it. If someone would have told me a year and a half before you actually need to move, you need to reach out to Tactics and go, what should we be doing now? I would say you're way too early. There's just no reason for anyone to talk to you. I would have thought 6 months is pushing it. What you're telling me is I'm wrong. I'm straight up wrong, because the truth is everything else takes a long time.
Darshan, I can never tell you you're wrong.
If I had to throw out, with a broad stroke, a time period, I would say 2 years.
Really? Interesting.
Well, if just forget the whole finding the space and negotiating a lease. Just think about how long it takes to design a space, pull permits, and build it.
And by the way, Darshan, now, because of craziness affecting the construction industry, both on the labor side and materials, that those timelines, the contingencies in those timelines have grown.
But let's take exactly that, because it's such a. Ooh, I'm afraid to touch this because we're 20 minutes past where we should be.
We can save it for next time.
Yeah.
But you said 2 years. Let's pick the 2 years. 2 years ago from today would have been February 28th, 2020. That would have, is that, if you were in anyone's shoes, would you go, let's start investing in real estate? Because the next thing you saw was the collapse of the real estate market. And then this meteoric rise right after.
Well, maybe what we should talk about next time we're on the podcast is what a timeline of a real estate transaction really looks like, right? Because
we'll go through that together.
There's a fair amount of work that goes in before you even go out to the market to start looking at space. There has to be, a meeting of the minds amongst all the stakeholders within a company about what is it that we're trying to accomplish with our real estate? What do we want to do with it? And depending on who the moving pieces are within a company, that process alone can take several months to really decide, okay, what is it exactly that we're trying to do here?
And gain consensus.
Great, gain consensus, then find it in the market, then negotiate proposals, then negotiate a lease, and then pull permits and build out a space. I mean, you can see pretty quickly how we often tell, like, our clients as the end users, they are often the bottleneck in the process, right? And I have no problem telling them that, and it's because we'll let you know the information that we need. We can't necessarily tell you how long it's going to take you to get that information back to us.
Right.
So a lot of times it's building in enough time to the process to really think these things through and get all the opinions of all the stakeholders so that everybody is on the same page before we start this process. What you don't want to have happen is get halfway through a lease negotiation and find out this isn't actually the direction we wanted to go in.
Right.
And that doesn't even count things. And your 2 years, for example, didn't even consider things like government and trying to get subsidies and all that stuff, which is a whole different beast.
That's a whole other can of worms. Absolutely.
Right. But such a fascinating conversation. We have to have you back on here, have to continue this conversation. This was amazing as always. One last question for both of you before we let you go. What's something most people don't know about you? Dan first.
Last time I talked about how I'm playing drums.
Okay.
So this time I'm going to go with, you know what? I'm a big skier. I'm getting my son into skiing, so I'm changing the question. But I'm going skiing on Friday with my son, and I'm excited about it. So I'm
there you go. Most people don't know you're going skiing on Friday. Gary?
Well, a lot of folks don't know that I'm a native of the heartland. I'm not a Philadelphian. I'm a native of suburban Milwaukee, and have spent many decades out here. And I think it's like you, Darshan, we've chosen to live here.
Right.
And that gives us a really interesting perspective on doing business here and on the culture of Philadelphia, the economy of Philadelphia, precisely because we made a choice.
Yes.
Despite the shtick, the impairments, it's a wonderful place to live, to raise a family, to grow a business, and to serve others.
Yep, absolutely. Gentlemen, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. Can't wait to have you on again.
Thanks so much, Darshan.
Take care.
Really appreciate it.
Take care.